son.
Your lies are a rare ability.
Geppetto's puppet, our only hope.
Power beyond your imagination.
Come back to me, Carlo.
Lie to protect yourself.
Be careful, clever one.
Welcome to My Xbox and Me, a very special episode of My Xbox and Me, because we're talking all about Lies of P. Kresh is joining me. He's finally finished the game, and I think it's probably a contender for our Game of the Year. We're going to start this discussion spoiler-free, so you can listen to that bit, and then we'll make it really, really clear when we're diving into spoilers. But I would assume by now, hopefully if you're interested in this game, you've probably played it. Came to Game Pass day one. What a get for Game Pass. Come on.
Huge for underrated for Game Pass, if we're going to be honest, because I don't feel like it's really, the game hasn't really been mentioned to the level I think it deserved to be mentioned.
100%.
And then B, it hasn't been mentioned for Game Pass specifically, which normally people, when games are on Game Pass, they're very big in promoting it and talking about it. I feel like Lies of P in that regard kind of went under the radar, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the other big Souls game that came out this year is Lords of the Fallen. I think Lies of P does everything better than Lords of the Fallen does. And Lords of the Fallen is a great game. But it also came to Game Pass day one for free, in quotes. We know that Game Pass games aren't free, but they kind of are. And it's the first game from this studio, and hopefully sets up an awesome franchise, which obviously we'll get into more later on when we speculate about what could be the future of this franchise. But for now, let's talk about the gameplay, because I feel like we can do that without getting into spoiler territory too much. One of the most unique things about this game, I think, from the Souls-like genre, is the ability to customize weapons in the way this game lets you. How did you find that? Was it confusing at all to you? Did you love it? Did you hate it?
I loved it. I don't think, for me, it wasn't confusing in the slightest. I think the only bit I got confused with was actually the special weapons.
Yep.
Because I was a little disappointed when I first got them, and I was like, you can't break them apart. You can't be using the blade from one thing with the handle to the other thing. But then as I sort of started messing around with them more, the reasoning kind of made sense, because they were a whole package as opposed to pieces. It's where the handle functions with the blade, and it's all meant to go together. And so it kind of made much more sense the deeper I got into it. I think I would say after I got the scythe weapon, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit more later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the weapon customization was something initially I was quite daunted by, and didn't quite get how it worked or why I would necessarily do it. And it is quite a technical mechanic, I guess. It's about modifying this weapon so that it works for the skills that you're leveling up, right? Or the type of damage that you want to be doing to a particular enemy, whether it's electric or fire or acid or whatever. And so when I think you learn that, and you kind of have to learn by doing, nobody really explains it to you in classic Souls fashion, that the handle dictates the weapon combo you're going to do, if you like, when you hit R1 or R2 over and over again. And the blade dictates the type of damage you're going to do and what level it scales with. Is that right? You've played more recently than me.
I believe scaling's with handle as well.
Oh, it is it? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
But then even that you can change, right? Even that you can customize.
Yeah.
By finding cranks and
change it.
Yeah.
So you can change something that's horrible with technique to be an A in technique. It's just going to take a lot of cranks, because I think it's 1, 2, and then 3 cranks possibly. I don't know if it ever gets to 3, but it becomes pretty costly. But I do actually think that's amazing. So if you want to level up technique and you play the game multiple times, you can literally make every single weapon viable for whatever build you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you can respec your character, but that comes quite late in the game. And I don't think it's a spoiler, right, to say that eventually you will get to a point where you can respec your character. And so if you have kind of committed down a route of, what's the strength version in this? It's called something else, isn't it? Motive?
I believe it is motive.
Something like that.
I mean, it's motive, technique, and advanced. I don't know which one is which, to be 100% honest with you.
I scaled into motive for most of the game. And that was the strength. So I was using heavy weapons and stuff like that. And then got to a point where I could respec and decided to respec just because I wanted to try out all the other kind of variations of the things I could do. And so, games like this definitely need respecking. I love to see it. It's not inexpensive to respec, which is interesting, right? you can theoretically do it many times, but it would just take you a while to be able to achieve that. So something to bear in mind if you haven't yet jumped into the game. But the weapon customization stuff is awesome. And, like I played this game earlier. I played it sort of 2 years ago at Gamescom, and then again in August before it came out. And when I played it in August before it came out, I played through the section just before the King of Puppets. That's not a spoiler, it's fine. And every weapon was unlocked and every weapon was maxed out. And I was like, oh my God, scrolling through that, debug weapon system. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. So many weapons and so much variety of the combinations you can do. It's just so cool.
It also becomes pretty inexpensive to rank up your weapons most of the way through. So I never felt like, oh man, I really should have leveled that weapon up. I always felt like I can go grind a little bit and bring this weapon up to a reasonable level if I really wanted to continue on using this weapon, which I thought was really dope.
It's something I didn't really grind for when I played, but I think I finished the game with 5 maxed out weapons. Some of them being boss weapons, which use different materials to rank up, to upgrade. So yeah, but I totally agree. My fear always in Souls game is am I putting my resources into the right bit, and do I need to worry about that? But it does something that Elden Ring did, and I'm sure other Souls games have done as well, where you will eventually be able to buy those upgrade materials, so that you don't have to necessarily grind enemies in a specific area for them. You could just grind souls that are not souls, so that you can buy them, which is great. I love that as well. And I think that speaks to exactly what this game is, right? Which is taking all of the best bits from Souls games, chucking them in a new setting that's really interesting to wander around, and just really well refined. Taking those best bits and just doing it right, learning from everything that came before it, even though this is the first in a franchise, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it, but I think I mentioned it on the podcast where you'll get through a very frustrating bit of the game, and immediately after that, there will be a shortcut for you, so you never have to grind through that area again. And I absolutely love that experience.
Yeah.
And I wish it was something you experienced more often in Souls games. And I understand why it's sort of the repetitive process. It's there usually in a Souls game. It was just really refreshing to not have to worry about that anymore after the first time going through it.
Yeah. And then something you've mentioned here that I didn't use until late game, and I think I stung myself by not using it until late game, the grinders and the weapon durability system. How did you find that?
So I actually really like the grinders. I found myself using them all the time. And then particularly during certain boss fights, learning the pattern of when you can actually pop them. Otherwise, you're just going to get completely messed up.
Yeah.
At first, that was my big issue with using them. And then at a certain point, I realized you just pop it before you go into the boss room. And then you go into the boss room with it prepared, and you can do that first chunk.
Yeah.
And then usually if you got to a second phase, you could pop it at the beginning of that second phase. So you wouldn't really have to stress about it. But yeah, the weapon durability system in general, even aside from the gameplay fact of it, was just visually a very satisfying component of the game. I mentioned it. I think I mentioned on the podcast. I might have been joking with Fix when I said it or something like that. It having an active reload type of system like Gears of War would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would have been sick. That would have been really cool.
Where you have to pay attention to the gauge and maybe be able to either finish it early or get some sort of benefit or something like that while you're dodging, and all that stuff could have been an interesting combo. But regardless, even without that, it was a very, very cool system. I like the fact that you were unlocking different grinders, and at first it was here's the different damage types, right? You're gonna get an electric one, a fire one, and an acid one, which were the only 3 damage types, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you could get ones that boosted your guard, boosted attack, and all this stuff. And then eventually you get probably the best one towards the end of the game, which is the parry one.
Yeah, so every time you block, it's a perfect parry. And that is awesome. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh man, I should have done the upgrades that make this effect last longer, which I wasn't paying attention to before. And now I'm like, oh dude, that's fucking cool. And I really like that. And so...
And the game gives you opportunity. You could even reset the P organ, which is your whole, I guess it's a whole other skill tree type of thing that you get for getting quartz, which you have to get by defeating specific bosses or getting to certain chests and stuff like that. The whole upgrade system of, I think, the character is fantastic, from weapons to these, not skills, I guess, the P organ. Also, one thing about weapons, going back to it a little bit, the Fable arts, which we didn't mention.
Yeah.
Very cool, very dope. An interesting mechanic, especially when you include the whole stagger system of the combat, because most Fable arts actually activate the stagger, which makes it easier to proc. Because at first I was trying to do just the charge attacks, and that was a mess most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, the Fable Arts was something I didn't use until late game either, really. And that definitely stung me as well. Like there's so much to think about while you're in this like combat. And it's one of those things of, the classic thing of like hoarding your rocket launcher ammo because you think you're gonna need it at some point. I was very much
Yeah.
like that with Fable Arts. And then you start unlocking stuff where it's like, oh, every time you pop a heal, you'll get like a Fable Art charge, or every time you do a pivot parry, you get a Fable Art charge, and you realize, oh, actually I'm getting these things quite a lot. And so you should be using them more than I think me as like somebody who wants to hoard all their special ammo would like to.
Yeah, I did that with everything in the game. And then I got to like the last set of bosses, which are pretty compact. And I was like, I have so many tools at my disposal. And I've been mainly using my Legion arm, which I didn't use till like towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
And the Fable arts. But you have a whole slew of different weapons and different stuff. You have a cannonball that can stagger enemies out of bosses, particularly out of special moves.
Yeah.
So if there's a move that's really annoying and you see it charging up, you just chuck one of those at it. You can only carry 3 into a battle, but it gives you the opportunity to avoid having to deal with that, which I thought was really dope.
Yeah, all the throwables and grenades and stuff that I think Souls games has kind of taught us are kind of useless. Like in Dark Souls 3 and stuff like that. Like when have you ever used a throwable? I don't know, but maybe other people do, but I certainly never did. All the things that like lure enemies to a certain area and stuff like that. I found myself using more in this game far too late and should have been using them much earlier. Because everything it gives you is important, right? Like it's not like Souls games where I feel like a lot of the stuff is like fluff that you just don't need.
I think I generally agree with that. I think the benefit of a Souls game comparative to this, right, is the ability of magic. And so a lot of the fact that this game doesn't have that sort of magic aspect, I think allowed them to be a little bit more creative with the items and make them a bit more useful for the player.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And then let's quickly then move on to sort of general thoughts. Again, we're keeping it spoiler free for now on enemies and bosses. Obviously, this is taking sort of huge inspiration. A lot of people sort of calling it aesthetically very much like a Bloodborne. But it's like puppet mechanic for me was like a really unique, interesting thing that made the enemies really unique and interesting. How did you feel about it?
I 100% agree with that. I think visually 3 of my favorite bosses in this game are 3 of maybe my favorite visual Souls bosses in general.
Wow.
In a very long time. Yeah.
Oh, now I want to get into spoilers. I want to know which ones. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of them's very early on. One of them's the police officer. The other 2 are spoilers.
Oh, it was in the demo. I think that's fine to talk about.
That one's in the demo. That one, like when he crawls around the building, I just thought that was so visually satisfying.
Yeah.
And I think you've gotten stuff like that in Souls games before, but it's just the fact that it was a puppet and the way they played with the fact that it was a puppet that just really, really added value to it, I think, for me.
Yeah, and one complaint I've seen, which I agree with sometimes and disagree with other times, right, is that because of the leaning into the puppet animatronic aesthetic and feel, a lot of the enemies are difficult to predict. Did you find that? Like they'll wind up for an attack and it'll be really like
I think at first I did, but then sort of my brain just started like counting the amount of times it fidgets. It's like, that's the 3rd time. That's when I have to parry, or that's when I have to dodge. And I think visually that system technically is easier to like learn how to dodge it, because there is quite literally a timer for you if you pay attention to it, as opposed to a normal Souls game. But again, those are just immediate responses. So I guess you could also argue that would be better. But no, I didn't really struggle with them. I actually like that aspect. They made them feel more puppet-like and unique from your typical Souls experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at least initially they're unpredictable in quite a nice way, right? Like Souls games are about trying and trying again and learning the pattern. And like, if that doesn't appeal to you, this game obviously won't appeal to you. But just knowing that there is sort of unique eccentricities to this that make sense, because these like puppets are malfunctioning and freaking out and and often when they get sort of to later stages get quicker, right, and like more frantic, which again ties into the story and makes sense for what they're trying to build here, and like panics you as a player. Like some of the boss fights get so fast, almost like Sekiro levels of fast. And it's all about that like parrying and dodging window and stuff like that. And so yeah, when you get it right, it's so satisfying. Like when you know something's winding up for like a 6-hit combo and you perfectly parry every single one of them, even if you're kind of cheating and using the grinder to help you do that, it's still so satisfying. It's still so satisfying. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. And we'll talk more about the enemies when we get into spoiler territory and talk about some of the bosses. But yeah, level design for me was like incredible. I remember playing, that Gamescom demo that I played really early on is the early demo section, right, that they released, and the verticality of it, the streets, the knocking down ladders to then get shortcuts and stuff. I was like immediately like, oh, this is really special. Like it very much felt like Bloodborne, that opening area, those city streets, the cobbled streets, But I think they knew what they were doing with that, right? They wanted to invoke that within you. And yeah, for me, I just absolutely loved it. And every time I went into a new area, I was just like, this is stunning. And the things I'm finding are really interesting. And the way that it snakes around to itself, I absolutely adored. What do you think of it?
Yeah, no, I think I echo your sentiments almost completely, with the exception of the very last area of the game. Like the whole last, we'll talk about it when we get into spoilers.
Okay,
I don't
sure.
want to spoil what it is. But that whole last section, I love the introduction to it. But everything past that, I was just kind of like, I'm not a fan of the feel or vibe of this, because I feel like it was so contradictory to what was there before that.
Okay,
but,
I get what you're saying. Yeah, I know where you're at.
I do agree with you on a majority of this game. Like the whole time, I'm like, this place is incredibly cool. I love going through the streets of Krat and then going to the opera house and stuff like that, which is a spoiler, I guess. A lot of that stuff is really cool. There wasn't a moment that I really wasn't in awe. One thing I do kind of wish they stepped their game up a little bit, which they don't need to, because I would love for them to do a little bit more environmental storytelling with their game, because I felt like a certain sort of stuff they would do repeated a lot. Like whenever you went into the Trinity room looked exactly the same every time for the most part.
Sure.
And so I wish there was a little bit more variety, maybe not necessarily storytelling in that environment. A lot of the times you see boxes blocking doors. You had mentioned this very early on, and then it made me notice it immediately. Boxes blocking doors that don't even necessarily need to be blocked.
Yep.
Was just like kind of a weird decision as well. So there's a little bit of level design stuff that I feel like they can upgrade and change, but for the most part, I absolutely did enjoy what was there.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think like some of that speaks to the scale of the game, which is quite small. Like those, they want to make it feel like a real city town thing that you're walking around. And so I guess it wouldn't make sense if it felt very narrow and like one path all the way through. But it is odd when you get to sections and you're like, there's just a big archway here and clearly a city street through there, but you're not allowed down there, so we're going to put some boxes there, and you just can't go that way, I guess. And that, yeah, it makes you feel boxed in a much bigger world.
Yeah.
But again, I think that speaks to the scope of the game. It's a relatively small team. It's their first game. It was ambitious, but you just see the limitations in a game like that, especially when you compare it to something like Elden Ring, where it's like, look at this vista, now go over there and just get there however you want to get there, and all those things. But yeah, like for me, I get those frustrations, but I'm just constantly like in awe of how pretty this thing looks. And yeah, I guess I agree with the environmental storytelling stuff. I think like part of that is down to the fact that this game just tells you the story a lot clearer than most Souls games.
Yeah.
So like you're not looking around. I mean, you can certainly like dig into item descriptions and stuff like that. I don't think you're getting those like epiphany moments, where you're drawing the string on the chalkboard to figure out, oh, this is this guy's sword that you mentioned 8 hours ago offhand, and da-da-da. There's some of that. You'd
be surprised.
There's some
of
that.
There is some of it. Yeah, it's just not. It's not as littered throughout the game as it is.
It's
in
not
the typical Souls.
George R.R. Martin wrote 1,000 years of history on this world, right? And
Yeah. Which makes sense, like you said. It is, the game tells its story in a much more obvious and linear way, where you know what the story is going on. There's no like needing to piece stuff together. The story is very obvious. There's a lot of side stuff you can get from reading the notes and looking at certain item descriptions, but none of that is necessary to walk away with an experience from this game.
Absolutely. And I would say the same about the fact that it's based on Pinocchio, obviously, which I don't think we've actually mentioned yet. But like, it's a huge part of it, right? And so you're going to be bumping into Geppetto, and the fairy and Jiminy and all these characters that you, I guess, know from the fairy tale. And I think the more you are familiar with that fairy tale, the more you have to pull out of this. Like, after finishing the game, I went and watched like a deep dive, and I didn't know any of this stuff about the original fairy tale, which, as with a lot of fairy tales, is a lot darker than you might think, and da-da-da-da-da. And all of that's here in the game with a twist, right? And like, almost turned on its head. We're getting to spoilers later, but like, like it does such a good job of that, of going like, hey, remember this thing from your childhood? Here it is, and it's fucked up and dark and horrible, and really fits in this world and feels just awesome to discover.
Yeah, no, I absolutely 100% agree with that. The whole approach to Pinocchio as the sort of driving force of this narrative just fits so well with what they're doing and what it looks like they're planning to do with the future, which I'm excited to talk about towards the end. But it makes the whole game, the ending to that game made the whole game a better experience, which I feel like in a Souls game isn't necessarily what I walk away with.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Yes, absolutely. And with that in mind, maybe we should get into spoilers now. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, if you're at all a Souls fan, please go play Lies of P. It's on Game Pass. How have you not already done it? My God. Literally, I don't know. I almost don't want to say this because I'm sure somebody in the comments will point out something that's better, but the best game to come on Game Pass this year? Probably.
I can't think of it unless they announce that Baldur's Gate is coming to Game Pass. I can't think of a better game.
Surely not.
You could probably make an argument for like Cocoon if you're going the indie route or something like that. So there's some stuff that you could maybe make an argument for.
But this should be a Game Pass system seller, a subscription seller, right? Like it absolutely should be. Sorry,
it just didn't get the notoriety I feel like it should have.
No, but like, again, we talk about this a lot on the podcast of like Microsoft not doing a phenomenal job of advertising their shit. Like, can you imagine like a really fucking good looking Lies of P cinematic? Dude, like it would be hype as fuck. Like the old like Gears of War cinematic trailers back in the day and stuff. You could do such a good job with it, Phil. Come on.
I agree with this. If anybody wants to know who Microsoft should buy next, I think I found the studio.
I surely those conversations have been had, no? Like, maybe not, but you know, Microsoft keep talking about want to make an impact. I know they're not Japanese, they're a Korean studio, but that side of the world. This would be a huge get. And I hope that they see the sales figures have done well out of this. It's one of those ones that would be fascinating to know, like what impact Game Pass had, right? Like, we're a load of people streaming this game because they had it on Game Pass. Did that generate a load more revenue on PlayStation and other places where you can play this game? Like, I really hope so. I really hope that this is like the now case study for like why third-party games going into Game Pass day one is really a good thing. It could be the opposite. It could be like, oh shit, loads of people played this game and we didn't make the money we were hoping to make on it. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't think that's the case because I think then you don't announce a DLC and a sequel are in the works. And they clearly have been in the works for quite a while with how much they were willing to talk about them as well.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't touch on, and maybe the people have already gone because I said we were going to get into spoilers. Actually, let's just talk about it in a spoilerific way. If you don't want spoilers, you can leave at this point. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe. Well, you're probably already gone, but you should have subscribed before you left. And if you're still here, subscribe now because we're about to get into spoilers. We've talked about the story a little bit and the other bits and bobs. The lying system in the game is probably the most abstract part of the game and the part that was sort of hyped up to be so unique and so interesting and the reason that you should play this game, and it's the driving force behind the game and obviously the driving force behind the Pinocchio fairy tale. How did you find it playing through it moment to moment when you were making those decisions whether to lie or not, and when did it click for you what was happening and how did you feel about it in general?
For the longest time, I thought it was kind of an irrelevant system.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you ever tried not lying at the gate to the hotel. The game just doesn't let you in.
Sure.
You have to lie.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of like, oh, the system's kind of whatever. You get the little puzzles where you can, you get multiple choice, and at a certain point, I think you essentially are offered, you can lie in one of those. And all the side quests give you the option to lie in the side quests and stuff like that. So I didn't quite get it. Until you get to the point where you start listening to the records in particular, and you get the same sort of response to when you lie, and it's like, oh, there's a warmth in you or whatever it is, and it's sort of like, oh, that's affecting your humanity. And it was a really interesting take on the lie, especially compared to the fairy tale of where the fairy tale's like lying's bad, kids, where this one's like, hey, sometimes in life you gotta lie to people
Yeah.
to like save their feelings, or sometimes the truth isn't sort of worth going through. And so I thought that was a very interesting dynamic that I didn't expect to be the case. I expected, hey, if you lie, you're going to be punished by the game, and the game's going to give you a worse experience for it.
Yeah, really interesting. And like it's one of those things. I was always really skeptical about what the lying would do in the game, right? Because like we know from like Souls games what humanity does and stuff like that, right? Like, so I thought it was going to be along those lines, and they were going to keep it that abstract all the way through. And then it gets to a point where like it kind of turns on a dime and it goes, cool, now you're human. We're in spoiler territory, everybody. Because you've lied enough or listened to records or done whatever. I kind of wish that it did do that slower. Like, I wish that wasn't a light switch flicking moment. Like, I wish you were turning that way over time. And it was like, because, when that happens, like, you just come back with longer hair and you're a human. There's no like dial that it's turning up. Other than the way people talk to you, I guess, or those that your heart is warming moments or whatever. And even that's too abstract almost. And then I kind of wish it did have like a mechanical difference in the game. I wish when I turned human, I was more squishy or quicker, like something where I was like, oh, I made a decision and now it matters, as opposed to just being the way that people talk to you or function with you.
I get what you're saying, but I think one of the main things about the game is the fact that puppets can be humans. Like, you're a human, but you're still a puppet. I don't think that aspect of you changed. He doesn't magically become flesh and bones, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I think having that sort of change sort of works counterintuitive to ultimately what the message was for the game in Pinocchio, and even the King of Riddles, which we'll get to in a little bit, where his whole thing very early on was like, are we human? Do you kill? Like, is killing being part of human? By the way, I think he was probably my favorite character in this whole game.
Sure.
Like, that little dialogue he gives you at the end of it was absolutely phenomenal. But ultimately the game does really like push this idea of like, can puppets be human and what makes a human? And sort of puts it against even Simon, who's the main bad guy for this game, who's like, I want to get rid of lying, puts him in sort of a situation where he is human, but he sort of sacrifices his humanity to become a god, where the puppet just wants to be a human. And how does he achieve that? By lying. Simon wants to get rid of lying. And so it puts them at odds in that degree. And I think their exploration of that made it an interesting system, even though I don't think, if you're looking at it just from a gameplay perspective, the lying in the game is not all that interesting or intuitive.
Yeah, and really early on, I had a moment where I was in the factory, and there's a survivor there, and I was wearing a certain outfit that I'd found in the factory, and as I went down to talk to that survivor, he said, oh, are you my friend who I lost? You must be the ghost of my friend who I lost. And then he went mad and started attacking me. And I emailed the devs, because I was playing this before launch, and I was like, is that a moment where I involuntarily lied to this guy? Like, that I was wearing the clothes of his friend, he thought I was that friend, does that count as a lie? And they said, no, it doesn't count as a lie, but that is unique dialogue if you're wearing that outfit when you go down there. And so I thought it was going to do loads of stuff like that then from that point on, where it's like, you didn't even know you were about to fucking lie, but you've just fucking lied to this person and shit like that. I was like, oh, this is fucking sick if it does this. And it didn't quite lean into it enough for me, but like, it's a small scale game. Go on.
That is a good point for something that I noticed that I don't actually know if it affects you in any way. They have two items in the game that allow you to return to a previous save point. One of them you have to sacrifice your ergo for, and one of them you don't sacrifice your ergo with. And so I thought there was a mechanical difference between the two or something, but I don't think there's any reason to use the one that makes you lose your ergo. So I was kind of confused with that. And so I thought that would lead into sort of the lying system, but it never appears to do that for me.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's like an accessibility thing. Like we're just going to give you the option to make this a bit easier for you and return if you want to with all your ergo, or not if you want a more Souls-like pure experience or whatever. Maybe I don't know. I'll be honest. I never used either of those items, so I don't know. Like I didn't look into it at all. But
I only started using them out of curiosity because I wasn't using them in the beginning. I was going through it like very Souls type experience for the longest time. I didn't even use specters for a majority of the game because I was like, it's not the Souls experience. Which, if you're playing through the game, I would recommend just use specters. Don't be that guy.
For sure. Yeah, that's actually worth pointing out. Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, I got to a point where I was, like, really pushing it to get it finished for the embargo. And so I got to a point where I was, like, quite early on, really, where I was, like, struggling with bosses. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to use specters. It did kind of make me wish, like, there was some co-op aspect to this game. Like, something that I kind of missed from Souls games, being able to call in real people as opposed to specters. I often felt like... Well, in some circumstances, I felt like the specters were more of a hindrance. Like, by having the aggro split in a way that I couldn't always predict, I felt like I wasn't getting helped. Like, it wasn't very often, but there was one boss specifically quite early on that I felt that way with. It was the weird slug one with the dude coming out of his back.
Oh, yes.
And then he turned around. Yeah, that one I felt like I did better on my own. It's one specific example, but I feel like if I'd had another person in there with me, I mean, it would have made life a lot easier. So that's, guess what I'm saying. But I never felt the need to like use the cube to bring back my Spectre, and like that would help me out.
My cube stayed strictly on the healing.
Oh, really?
That's if I remember to use my cube, which half the time I did it. Until like the end of the game, I wasn't really using my cube.
Yeah, I wasn't using it towards the end of the game, but like sort of halfway through, I'd say I was using it often, like immediately as I entered a boss room to make my Spectre do like acid damage or fire damage in a similar way to use the grinder, you know, early on before you get the perfect block. That tended to be what I was doing the cube with. But then I got to a point where I really wasn't using the cube at all because it took too long to spin up. I didn't buy the upgrade to do it quicker, and I was just like, not.
And then also having to run. I wish there was a fast travel to the tree, to the golden apple tree or the money tree or whatever they call it.
Yeah,
so you could just pick them up there and buy the wishing stuff, and then just dip.
Yeah, the tree currency thing is something I didn't dive in too much, a bit because I would like forget about it. You know, it's on a timer to respawn them, and I'd forget that it was a thing. And like you say, you got to run up there to go get them, and then go somewhere else to trade them with, you know, this person or that person. I was very lucky that when I think the fox asked me for some, I just had some. Otherwise, I just wouldn't have given it to her.
Yeah. So when you go to fight the brother, did you have one on you?
No.
I didn't either. I felt so bad.
I felt awful.
I felt horrible. I stopped playing the game and I did not play the game for like 2 or 3 days after that. Because I was like, I died to him on purpose, first of all. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to wait and I'm going to go back and he's going to give me the option again. But I knew that wasn't the case. So I just didn't launch my game. And so you go back and then you have to fight him all over again. And I felt bad because I like the brother. I like both of those characters very much so.
Yeah, I do too. And it comes back to that whole, like, I think everybody in this game, the kind of classic Pinocchio fairy tale is lying is bad. There is good and there is bad, and lying is bad. Whereas this whole game is like gray area. Everybody's in the gray area, right? Everybody's gonna lie. Everybody's gonna tell the truth, and they're all gonna be good and bad and everywhere in between. And they're a perfect example of that, right? Of like, even when you get backstabbed by them, you're kind of like, yeah, but I get it. Like, yeah, but you're okay. Like, it's fine.
He's sick. They're trying to live. The world's in like a horrible spot. It all makes sense because they backstab you in a malicious way. No, right? But they don't do it out of malicious intent. It's never for the harm of Pinocchio. It's for their own survival.
Sure.
Whereas certain other characters, that's very much so not the motive. But that, like you said, it's a very like human thing. You never know how it's gonna go one way or the other.
But by that point in the game, I had already decided, fuck humanity. Did you ever get to that point? No?
No.
Oh yeah, I was full on like, I'm gonna fucking like, I knew Aladoro was like fucking me over. Like, I knew all these things. I was kind of like just done with everybody. Even his little sidekick guy. I got to the point, you know, the guy who's like chasing after him, who like wants to be a treasure hunter as well. Yeah. I was like, there's something ain't right about you either. I know, like, I'm gonna fuck you up at some point too.
Hiding something is what. Yeah. All humans are evil.
Yeah, I got to that point where I was just like, you know what? I think everybody's fucking dirt, and I think that's basically true of the game. I'm not sure there's anybody who's like at some point doesn't backstab you or lie to you or Even fucking
Quite
Geppetto.
a few. Yeah, Geppetto, I saw from a mile away. That one became kind of obvious.
Yeah, early on they try and kind of, I think, show you that, right? Like there are other people, you pick up something and somebody quite blatantly references Geppetto's a bad fucking dude. I think maybe
Well,
it's
the first
Simon.
person.
First time you see Simon as well. So go on.
Simon says it. The donkey.
Oh yeah, of course, the donkey. Yeah.
Yeah, the donkey says it on the bridge. There's constantly, but again, it goes to that thing of like, oh, he's like your father figure. He's not evil, and that worked for a while, and then it just sort of got to the point where it's like, I don't know if I believe this anymore. And then Geppetto also asks you at one point during the last level when you first free him from his cage. He's like, did you believe in me? Did I do good enough? Did I do good enough for you to trust me? And I was like, no, fuck no, you didn't. I have absolutely no trust in you.
I did the same thing, and I immediately regretted it because I was trying every opportunity I got. I was trying to lie, thinking that it would at that point, I think lying or not had already had its effect. Right, I was already human as far as looks or whatever went, and so and I don't think the nose was getting any longer on the painting, which was cool and weird as well. Like I was interested in that. But, yeah, by that point, I was like, no, I'm lying at every opportunity I get, And then he's like, do you think I'm a good dad? And I'm like, no, fuck you. And it's like, oh, no, that's the truth. Oh, no, I fucked myself.
I was supposed to lie.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, the nose on the painting, were you as obsessed with that as I was? Every fucking time I went back to the hotel, I was like, what the fuck is this?
Every time I went in and I got the first time I got close enough and I saw you could interact with it, I had to interact with it every time I walked by it, especially when I noticed it got longer. Like, it's going to let me use it at some point. I'm going to get to use it at some point. And then eventually you do, and you get a record and a weapon, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
A weapon and record, which I fucked. So I didn't get it because I needed to go back after New Game. Like, after I'd finished the game, I needed to go back to the hotel. And the final message of the game confused me and immediately started me into New Game Plus. And so I never got the weapon.
There's a couple of stuff you miss at the end by not going back, and I have missed them as well.
Sad.
'Cause I thought like, oh, if you don't continue here, like it's a new game completely, like not a New Game Plus. I didn't know you get to continue the game afterwards at the end, which would have been interesting to go back and see some of the stuff that might have been different after the ending.
Absolutely. Quick question. Did you give the old lady the medicine that it offers you to give her?
Yes.
You did. I didn't. I let her die.
She dies either way.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that
I
makes
think
me feel a bit better
the
then, I guess.
options are she dies painfully or she dies painlessly.
Yeah, she dies quickly and painlessly, or slowly but painfully, and then she's around to hang out with the butler, I guess, who is in love with her.
Is in love with her, yeah.
Yeah, that
Would
was
love
kinda
a very big theme of this game, like very
Yeah.
big.
And whether or not you should fuck robots or puppets.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Always
Fuck
fuck
whoever
the
you
puppet.
love.
Yeah, exactly.
Always
yeah.
fuck the puppet.
Yeah.
The bigger and scarier the puppet, the more you should fuck it.
That surprised me as well. There's early on, or not early on, I suppose, but relative. I think in the first kind of third of the game, there's a guy who's like, "Hey, my wife's dead. Go find her and like get something off of her for me." And then you get there and realize she was a puppet, and he was in love with this puppet, and he's like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. That's fine, right? Like, don't worry about it. People fuck puppets, I guess." And he never comes back. I thought for sure he was gonna show up in the. So go on.
A lot of the side quest stuff, characters never come back. I feel like that's probably one of the most unsatisfying part for a majority of the game, with the exception of like main character side quests, like the smithing lady who upgrades your weapons, and Vivendi's side quest. Other than those two, I felt like a majority of the side quests just sort of felt a little empty, and I wish there was a bit more to them.
Yeah, I agree.
In the game.
I agree. I think like that's not unusual for Souls games, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't think it was an odd experience for a Souls game by any means.
Yeah.
Just if they had worked it in, that goes a little bit more to the environmental storytelling thing I mentioned earlier. If there was a little bit more of that to just add a little bit more emphasis to these stories, and there is a bit of it, but just a little bit more, and I would have been satisfied. But ultimately, like, that doesn't adjust or negatively impact my opinion on the game at all.
Yeah.
So it's not really that big of a complaint.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. So then, let's talk a little bit about specific bosses then. Are there any in particular that stood out for you for either good or bad reasons?
Three good bosses. I mentioned the police officer.
Right.
Absolutely loved his design. Then there's the Puppet King. Specifically, the first phase I thought was like goofy as hell. I wasn't really like into it. It was kind of like a whatever boss. And then you get to that second phase, and holy is that for the longest time, that was my favorite boss in the game up until you get to the very last boss in the game. But I think it might be one of my favorite bosses in a Souls game in
Really?
general. Yeah.
Well, I came full circle in the bad way on the King of Puppets. Like, I started that fight fucking hating it, and then got to the second phase and was like in it and retrying and was like, oh yeah, this is fucking sick, and then came back round to fucking hating it.
To hating it? Oh, interesting. No, I walked away from the moment that I first started that second phase. I was like, I absolutely love this boss fight.
Really?
It's just aesthetically aesthetically clues. I don't even know what I was trying to say.
Aesthetically
Aesthetically cool. The
Dope as
mechanics
fuck
are
cutscene on the way in.
yes. It really reminded me of the Jedi cutscene earlier in the year. With the Jedi who turns into a spoiler for that game, I guess. Spoilercast, even though it's a spoilercast now for that. The Jedi who turns into a Sith after he awakens, who's missing his arm.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
way
yeah,
better
so
than that,
it
I would
gave-
say. But yeah.
I agree. But it gave me that sort of vibe, and that for majority of this year was my favorite boss moment, boss reveal moment until you get to this point, and I thought that was absolutely cool. And until you get to the final boss of the game, he was absolutely my favorite boss of the whole entire thing.
That's interesting because as well for me, I feel like, and you're not supposed to at this point in the game, but I didn't have a lot of context for really who he was. Like I was like, okay, I'm gonna go fight the King of Puppets. This feels very end game for something I've only been playing for 5 hours at this point or whatever. And then like there's the second phase and stuff, and I'm like, am I supposed to have context for who this is or why I care? And that comes way later, right?
Yeah.
And it is interesting and it is cool, I think, but I still don't fully understand what it was all about, I guess. Maybe I kind of do. But that's
I don't know. I
classic
kind
Souls
of,
shit.
yeah, I saw him and I was like, he kind of looks like my character. So I was like, there's a connection there.
Okay,
And then
yeah.
the whole scene in the background with Geppetto taking the heart from one person to the other, I kind of thought he was a failed Geppetto puppet, is the way I took that. Yes, he was a failed
yeah, I guess that.
Pinocchio.
I get that. And then you really enjoyed the last boss as well.
Yes, the last boss is probably my favorite Souls game boss ever.
Interesting. So
Maybe I was gonna say the giant wolf in I forget which Soul. I forget which Dark Souls it is. The wolf with the sword in its mouth.
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
that
that's
one's a
dope as
better
fuck. Yeah,
fight.
that's so cool.
Yeah,
And sad. And I think that like
incredibly sad.
yeah, that kind of helps that boss fight quite a bit. But yeah, like I think the last boss was really good as well. What I did have to do though, like I respect as I was fighting the last boss, and I respect everything into technique, and I used the boss sword that has a parry in its build up.
Oh yeah, the one
heavy
that's
attack.
not a katana but looks like a katana. It's
Exactly,
like yeah.
That was I had to make that decision. Like the only way I think I'm going to beat this is by totally respeccing and having more speed is what I needed. I needed more dash. I needed more stamina. And using my heavy weapon, I just wasn't being able to get hits in and then have enough stamina to get out and block my way out of it. So yeah, utilizing that build up with the parry in it, with the perfect block, not cube grinder and all those things. Yeah. That was what let me win the game, I guess. Like I banged my head against that wall for far too long and then decided to respec and then got through it without too much trouble. So yeah, I didn't love that. I felt like I really need to respec here. Although I like that I had the opportunity to do it and had the option to do it. But I did feel like I was being forced a little bit into doing it.
I think you could have gotten away if you perfect parried everything.
Yeah, exactly that, right?
But even then, I do agree with you. That boss is a little bit fast on reactions, and I didn't spend enough time with the heavy weapons because I was a technique build. Even in the beginning, before I respec the first time, I was putting everything into motive, but I was only using technique weapons, and I was so stubborn with it. So I was like, I'm turning all my technique weapons into motive weapons, and I'm not switching this at all because I was super stubborn with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I don't feel like up until that point, I didn't feel like I was being punished for picking the way I was playing. And then I did. And look, you're right. Maybe if I'd persisted. But I did think as well, like, there's no way I'm going to be able to respec and then learn this new weapon and then learn this boss fight again. But I just found it so much easier respecing its technique and doing it that way that I was like, well, maybe this is the way the game wanted me to play this. And that weapon's just fucking cool. Having a parry in the build-up on your R2 is fucking sick. And it felt so satisfying every time you landed it. And it was just awesome.
That weapon and the scythe weapon, two of my favorite weapons in this game. And maybe two of my favorite weapons in any Souls game in general. Like, those weapons are both absolutely fantastic to use. Especially the second one you're talking about with the parry. The moments you would land that parry were so satisfying. Especially when it was in a boss fight and it would give you the stagger, and if you staggered enemies right away, you'd get them into that knockdown state so you could punish them right away, which I thought was really cool what the game did, that if you ever got an enemy into a stagger state with a charged attack or something, or Fable Art or something like that, it puts them directly in the vulnerable state. You didn't have to like reapply that one thing, which was really dope.
Yeah, it was really cool. And did you find yourself breaking weapons a lot on enemies? This was a big, we probably should talk about this in the spoiler-free section, but there we go. If you perfect parry an enemy enough times, it will break the weapon that they're holding. I only experienced it twice on bosses. And so I was a bit like, oh, this is the thing I wish happened more. I felt like I was parrying enough. I don't know, but maybe not.
Yeah, I had it happen a good amount to me. But I do on bosses. I'm trying to think. I know I've had it on smaller enemies happen a lot. I'm trying to think on bosses. I definitely had it with the one chick that you climb the ladder up and she's just standing there with the huge blade and the knife.
Oh yeah.
I had it happen with her, and I'm trying to think if I've had it happen with anybody else, and maybe not with bosses. I think you might be right on that.
Yeah, it was a cool mechanic. I thought it was a really, really cool idea and a cool mechanic. But I often felt like, and I think maybe because I was using heavy weapons as well, like when I was fighting normal enemies, either they're done in 2 hits or they're probably going to kill me. And so often I wasn't getting to the point where I was perfectly parrying normal weapon enemies. Like those fights just didn't last long enough for me. And so, yeah, maybe if I'd, been technique for longer or whatever, I would have found that a bit better. But I thought it was a cool idea. And then I just kind of finished the game and was like, I didn't really see that much.
I saw it a lot on smaller enemies. Yeah, they even added some enemies later in the game that you could parry and break their weapons, and they would sort of rebuild their weapons as well.
What? I didn't see that.
It's the guys with the lightning staffs.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, them. So you could break their weapon, and it's not really like a cool visual or something like that. It just sort of happens, so it's not really anything. It felt like a last minute thing, like, oh, it'd be cool if we had an enemy that sort of regrew their weapon or fix their weapon or whatever. Hopefully that is something that they do later in games. I would love it if they did sort of the Souls type experience with that, where normally in the Souls games, if you break a boss's tail, you can get a weapon off of it. A lot of times, if they did it where if you break a boss's weapon, you can get something out of it.
That would be cool.
A very dope experience.
Or even if you did that and it just gave you the blade, right? And then you could put that blade onto another handle or something like that. That'd be kind of cool, right? Like, or vice versa, or that'd be kind of neat.
Yeah, I agree with that. That now that you say that, that fits perfectly with the game.
You can have that one for free, NeoWiz. Crack on. So then we talked a little bit about it in the spoiler-free territory and touched on a little bit here, but like how the game ties into the fairy tales and stuff. Do you find yourself getting lost when it introduces like Jiminy and you're supposed to know that that's like a cricket from the fairy tale? Will you like picking up on stuff like that, or would you feel a bit lost with it?
Yeah, I was picking up on it for the most part. I was just constantly like, what's the twist on it? And with Jiminy in particular, you don't get the twist until the very end, and even then, I don't know if you fully get the image of Jiminy.
Not really. It establishes early on, I guess, that like everybody has a Jiminy, and they're just like it's like having an iPhone. You have a Jiminy, and it follows you around, and it tells you about the world and stuff like that.
100%. I did not get that.
Oh, really?
From it.
I think it tells you that quite early on, because she's like, when you go to the hotel for the first time, I think is Geppetto or the fairy says like, oh, your Jiminy is malfunctioning. You should go and get that.
Oh, she says your Jiminy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But then you never see anybody else with one. Now that I'm saying it out loud, but that's the way I interpreted it. Is that like having a Jiminy was like having an iPhone.
because when you're climbing up the alchemist's tower to fight Simon in the end, Jiminy mentions like, I've been here before, I remember it, but I don't I get this feeling when I'm here, etc., etc.
Interesting.
So I didn't take it as there's multiple Jiminy's. I took it as like somebody messed with this Jiminy very particularly, and my mind
interesting.
went to the reveal at the end of the guy on the phone with the lady on the other end.
Let's talk about that in a second. But the reason that I thought Jiminy was saying that, because he says it as well when you go to the library and you look at the book, and it's the book of Pinocchio, right? It's the fairy tale of Pinocchio. And Jiminy's like, oh, no, it's not actually. It's like a fairy tale about a boy who becomes a puppet and lies. And then Jiminy's like, I can't remember the name of the person this book's about or whatever. And he can't remember the name Pinocchio. And there's like things like that happen relatively, probably 5 times throughout the whole game where Jiminy's like, I've been here, or I don't remember this, or I don't quite remember that. And then it's revealed that the fairy, every time you die, the fairy is turning back time to reset you so that you can carry on. And that's what's happening. And so I thought it was a symptom of that. Like she's rewound time so much that Jiminy doesn't quite know what he knows and what he doesn't.
Oh, that's a very fair point. That's definitely a possibility without a doubt.
And yeah,
I'd never
I don't
put
know.
those two together. That would make sense as a sort of teaser to that big reveal when it happens. Did you see that reveal coming at all? Her being a spirit?
But also, does it really matter? Like, I wasn't really questioning why I'm resetting each time.
Yeah. I thought it was nice for that to like sort of be the reason that she's rewinding time.
Sure.
I also think it makes the moment that I was kind of like confused by when you first go to the statue that lets you reset everything. That she's just standing there, and I'm like, crazy lady, what are you doing? Why'd you walk all the way over here? She never walked there.
Yeah.
That sort of made sense at that point. And then it also makes sense where none of the other characters, with the exception of the cat, ever move positions. But every time you load in, she's loaded into a different area. And so that sort of, in a weird way, sort of clicked in me that she's not really there in a sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess
Which I don't know if that's by design. That might not be by design, but that's sort of what I read into it.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I was like, sure. When that's like a twist, I'm like, okay, sure. I don't think I really care either way. It could do some interesting stuff in the future. Like, some people, I guess, some beings have the potential for time travel. That could be interesting. Have you painted yourself in a corner now? We'll get into the DLC and sequel in a bit. Of if I'm another character and the same mechanics happening and nobody's turning back time, is that a bit odd? Like, don't I need a deity now who's turning back time for me if I'm going to restart all the time?
I think we'll talk about it because there is once we get to like that ending bit, because there is.
Let's talk about the guy on the train then. So basically, we both got the same ending. Do you get the train either way, and any ending you get, or is that's a specific ending?
I think that's specifically for the ending we got, which is supposed to be the good ending.
Sure, we should both say. I mean, we said it anyway. We told Geppetto he was a shit dad. We decided to kill the nameless puppet. Which is a really cool ending as well. When like Geppetto jumps in the way because the nameless puppet's about to kill you. I was like, that's fucking sick. And
it's not even that he's gonna kill you, it's that he's gonna destroy the heart. So even in that final moment, Geppetto's an asshole. And I was so glad with that because I was like, it would have been such a boring ending to have Geppetto suddenly change character and be like, no, Pinocchio, you've been my son this whole time. To him constantly still at the end worrying about Carlos, I think was a very, very good twist on that.
Really cool idea. And so then, of course, fade to black, and then we get this guy on the train. And you said to me before we started recording, do you know who that guy on the train was? And I said, was it Dorian Gray? And you were like, why the fuck would it be Dorian Gray? Who's Dorian Gray? So when you find the painting of Pinocchio that you put up on the wall and it starts to grow the nose, somebody says, or you can read the description, or something happens, and somebody says, oh, it's painted by a guy called D. Gray. They said his paintings were so good that it would trap the soul of whoever he painted in it. Dorian Gray is like an original vampire. And so he paints a portrait of himself to keep himself young. And he has an attic full of all these portraits of himself. And if he looks at the portrait, he turns to dust. I think that's the legend of Dorian Gray. And so they set him up in this world as well. Interestingly, I don't think Dorian Gray is in the public domain. And so I'm not sure how they got away with that or what that was.
Well, they just called him D. Gray. They didn't say Dorian Gray.
They
specifically,
absolutely
to be
just
fair.
say D. Gray,
Yeah.
so who knows? But I thought that's what they were leading into. I thought that's who was on the train, but you don't think that's right.
No, so the character goes by the name Paracelsus. I butchered that name absolutely, but apparently he is sort of a scientist and of sorts and medical dude in real life. I didn't read too much into it, but story-wise, he is the character that's by the tree that gives you the wishing stone and takes the golden apples. It is that exact character.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but all the way through the game, that guy is like, I'm dying, I'm ill, I need
a lie.
this shit, right? Right.
Yeah. It's a lie. He's there because of the Krat experiment, whatever they're doing to chase after eternity. So when you were talking about the point of how will they have you coming back to life, it might not always be the time travel aspect. It could be something else because it sounds like they found multiple ways to eternity where every game sort of has their own take or their own approach on it. Of course, they can always do the rewinding time because at the end of the game, the blue fairy's still alive.
Yeah.
Except she's a puppet now, which I thought was a very interesting turn of events.
And so I've seen as well on TikTok, the place where I get all of my valuable news that I can trust. I saw somebody running around Krat Hotel and everybody's a puppet.
Interesting.
And I had no context for it. I didn't know if it's like a New Game Plus thing, if that's what happens when you tell the truth all the way through, everybody else starts turning into puppets. But like the blacksmith lady's a puppet, Geppetto's a puppet, they're all puppets.
Interesting. I have not seen that. I wonder.
I don't know where that comes from.
Real
Look it up for me really quickly. But yeah, so like you're absolutely right. There is a whole ton of ways that they can do this like time rewind mechanic or not, right? Dorian Gray would be another way to do it. Like this guy's immortal unless he looks at a painting of himself that he's done. And so like he could die and come back over and over again. And they've definitely set up that character, and they've of course set up this like Marvel cinematic world. You look deep in Thor, Kresh. Have you found it? Did I lie? Did I make it up?
No, it is apparently a thing. I'm trying to look at the exact moment where you see everybody in the hotel.
It's really cool. It's a cool idea.
Yeah, everyone gets turned into a hotel. Geppetto turns everybody into a puppet to stabilize the hotel.
Is that in a different ending, or is that?
I'm assuming it's in a different ending. I'm assuming it's in the ending if you give him the heart.
Interesting.
Because it would make sense for him. He doesn't want to create variables where Carlos wouldn't live. So it absolutely makes sense.
Creepy as fuck. Like, it reminds me of, like, did you guys have Goosebumps? Was that a UK thing?
No, we had Goosebumps as well. Yeah. That would definitely be a Goosebumps thing for sure.
The ventriloquist puppet, where the kids fall down the well and become ventriloquist puppets. I think that's the plot of that. It terrified me as a child. It should not be classified as children's TV, but it is.
100%. So it's you get that ending. That is sort of the ending of the game. If you
sacrifice your heart and return back to the hotel, everybody's a puppet.
Yeah, so which makes sense why people call that the bad ending.
Sure, and probably the non-canon ending, because like you say, we have DLC on the way, we have a sequel on the way. Maybe you know more about this than me. Obviously, after the train sequence, you see Dorothy and her magical red slippers walking across the rooftops of Krat. And so, what do you think? Have they already said, is that DLC? Is that a sequel? What are we going to be doing with Dorothy?
They haven't said, and that is a very interesting thing that I could see them taking either to a sequel or to the DLC. Mm-hmm. The DLC, I feel like they can go two routes. One is the Dorothy route, and one is the post Krat situation with the blue fairy being a puppet now and sort of exploring that idea and that sort of part of the game. Or they could go the Dorothy route. I do know there is a yellow stargazer somewhere in the game that you can't actually interact with, and it says not available for use yet or something along those lines. Ooh. Which people were saying is like, that's like the yellow brick road. It's a yellow stargazer. And so it adds that avenue that I would guess that the DLC is probably going to be have to do with Dorothy. Maybe not the full exploration of Dorothy as a character, because that does seem like it's being set up for a bigger plot point instead of just that. But yeah.
I would kind of love it if in a sequel we play as Dorothy and Pinocchio and Geppetto are the baddies. And it's the bad ending that is canon.
Oh,
and
interesting.
he's turned everybody into puppets. And you're like, fuck this guy, let's go fuck him.
That would be, even if they were to never make that an actual sequel, I would be 100% down for that to be a DLC or something along those lines. I think that would be a very cool exploration.
As a DLC, I feel like it would be short-lived and kind of undermine the game. A
little bit, yeah.
If you turn the protagonist of the game into a bad guy that you don't play as in the DLC. Yeah,
that's fair.
But it'd be interesting to see what they do with the DLC, because if the DLC is a direct continuation, then they have to commit, right? They have to commit to a canon ending. You'd have thought.
Well, I'd assume
yeah,
that's actually a very good point. Pinocchio's lived many lives.
Yeah.
So it absolutely could be a sequel. It could also be a sequel for Romeo and how the Puppet King came to be in that whole situation.
Prequel.
There's a lot of stuff that isn't fully explained to the player as of yet, which I think is very purposeful. Because there's obviously stuff that were in play with the character on the train and the way they called it Project Krat, and how it's a success and how they found immortality and stuff like that. And the god arm being relevant and who exactly that character is, because I'm sure it's going to be a fairy tale character of sorts that we'll find out at some point.
Sorry, explain this to me. I've lost you there at the end.
So at the end when you beat Simon, you grab the hand of God from him.
Yes.
The arm of God from him. At the end of the game on the train, the character mentions we still have to get the arm back, which could very easily be mistaken for you have to get Pinocchio's arm back.
Yeah, the prosthetic limb or whatever. Yeah.
Legion and stuff like that. But I don't think that's the reference. It's probably the reference for the God arm. And so fairy tale wise, I was like racking my brain as to what that could be, but I think that's pretty much a unknown for right now. Yeah.
Very cool.
So a lot of different avenues they can take the story. They've set a lot of different stuff up for the story as well, which I thought was very dope and very sort of, they knew they had a good game here with everything they've done.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, like because they're planting it in this fairy tale world, it's such rich, like fucking awesome. Like before I clicked that it was Dorothy, I saw red and I was like, oh, it's Little Red Riding Hood. And the big bad wolf. And like, holy shit, that could be a fucking awesome avenue to go down. Like,
I originally was like, oh, they're going to be more along the Disney route of stuff because that makes sense. It's more in the face fairy tale stuff. And they were to Wizard of Oz, which by no means is a small fairy tale. It's a very big fairy tale. But I would say in today's age, it doesn't hold the weight that a lot of these other fairy tales might necessarily hold.
I also thought, and I might be wrong, and you might know more about this than me, a character that you meet that I think is quite underutilized but does make their way to the hotel is that hunter woman.
Yes.
And I think her name's Belle or Bella.
Oh, what? Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast is
why partner turns into a monster.
Yeah, is immediately what I clicked. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Underutilized for what this world could be, but cool. Are we going to do anything else here? And then, like, no, was the answer. Unless I didn't go back and talk to him and figure out what
No, I don't think there was anything else. That kind of makes that a little bit disappointing for me as well. Because that could have been a very cool, like, sort of exploration of that. There's a lot of, like, the ending and introducing Dorothy and, like, sort of like, oh, the Tin Man's in that world and he'd be the equivalent of Pinocchio, and how do they incorporate that? Will Pinocchio be the Tin Man, or will the Tin Man be somebody who wants a heart and essentially is chasing the main character Pinocchio because he has what he wants? And so there's so many different routes they could take with that. They're looking, now you mentioned the Beauty and the Beast thing. It's like they were able to make that fit in a game that I don't necessarily know would have been able to fit. That I'm just like curious how they would approach any fairy tale they choose to sort of intertwine into the narrative that they're doing.
Yeah, it's just opens it up to be really cool, right? And also a little bit disappointing, like kind of Beauty and the Beast, I guess, is in this world. But like you say, like they could expand on that, right? Like the lion from Dorothy's fairy tale could be the beast. Like I guess they could tie that into each other and make it work and make it happen, right? Like I'm sure they could and they would. Like all the little touchstones to the fairy tale, most I should say of the little touchstones of fairy tale, I really enjoyed. Like the submarine being the whale that takes you to Toy Island, like being swallowed by the whale. Like I was like, cool. I guess there's a submarine now in this game. I wouldn't have been shocked if it was a whale. Like if you just got eaten by a whale at that point and that took you to Toy Island.
That would have been the most Souls thing ever if you actually got eaten by a whale and sent over.
Yeah. I
but
thought it was
yeah,
a
no-
little bit odd that it was just a submarine. I was like, I get what you're doing to tie this in, but this feels odd to me in a way that a whale probably wouldn't have felt
Would
that
feel-
odd at this point.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting turn because in being more normal, it became more odd for the game. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
so I'm really interested to see what they end up doing. Beauty and the Beast, Dorothy. How weird is it gonna get? But you're right, the Tin Man. I didn't even think about the Tin Man, but that plays so well into this world that already exists. And so,
yeah, the Tin Man's what really got me. Like once they mentioned Dorothy, and my mind immediately went to the Tin Man. That's what really got me into like they absolutely know what they're doing with their approach to these fairy tales. They didn't just happen upon Pinocchio and come out with something sort of luckily. Not to say that it would have been luckily, but sort of like without a bigger vision for other fairy tales. They clearly know what they're going to do, and with them being willing to introduce Belle, and if that is the Beauty and the Beast connection, and that's all we're going to get from that, that makes me think like, oh, some of the other stuff they have in store is going to be better than that turn. And maybe something like that with how known Beauty and the Beast is actually a better thing, that they're not playing
it's
around
a really
with
good
something we
point.
know super well.
Really good point. Yeah, actually, yeah, you're probably absolutely right. It is interesting that now that we're talking about it, right, how many of these fairy tales hinge on the idea of humanity, right? Like Beauty and the Beast is all about, is the beast human anymore? Like you talk about the Tin Man, but the Scarecrow is the exact same in Dorothy, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea that like you have the brains to become more human. Like it all plays so well into itself. My God, they thought it through.
the lion with the courage,
Yeah.
right? So like instead of asking you to lie in the next game, it could be asking you, do you go the scared route or do you go the courageous route?
Are you going to be brave? You play as the lion, and are you going to be brave? That could be fucking cool. Oh my God,
Yeah,
I'm so excited for this franchise. I'm so excited for this team. We didn't even talk about it, but it's so stunning. Like we talked about how small the scale of this game is, but when you remember that this is their first game, and it's it's incredible. What an achievement!
It's better looking than games from studios that have put out multiple copies of games, right?
Yeah.
The hair physics in this game, I was so confused with why they put so much effort into the hair physics at first. I was like, there's way too much into this hair. It looks good, but then you grow your hair, and I'm like, it all absolutely makes sense at that point because the hair change is a very, very big point for them, and narratively they wanted that to connect. But yeah, visually the game is absolutely stunning. It's one thing that I'm constantly playing, which is one of the reasons I'd mentioned my least favorite level was the level at the end with the alchemists, is that area just doesn't look good. It kind of looks like shit everywhere you turn.
Yeah.
It's like it does visually, it isn't as satisfying as the earlier part until you get to like that last end and you're actually climbing the alchemist tower. And you get that dope view at the top and everything like that. Once you get there, I think visually the game sort of goes back up on an uptick. But the rest of that, it was just such an uninspired area for the most part.
Very, very quick sidebar. You mentioned the hair, and it reminded me. There's a bit of the developer interview. I did a developer interview with the director. If you want to see that, go to the Future Game Show YouTube channel, by the way. But there's a bit that I cut out that now feels more relevant, and I shouldn't have cut out, which is where he kind of joked that he wished he'd given Pinocchio longer, more like rocker hair, because he's part of an indie band, and he wanted Pinocchio to be more of a rock star, but he lost that battle. And then when you become more human, Pinocchio gets longer hair, which is now an interesting thing for him to have said, but there we go. I cut it out of the dev interview because I thought it was boring and irrelevant, but there we go. But yes, so look, we've gushed about this game now for an hour or whatever. Obviously, there's going to be more. There's going to be DLC. There's going to be a sequel. So what do you want to see improve, I guess, in the sequel and the DLC potentially?
Definitely either the environmental storytelling or the side quest storytelling. I would love to see one of them improved. It doesn't even have to be much. It just has to sort of make that ending feel full in a lot of those stories, where a lot of times, with the exception of the puppet, not the puppet king, the puppet, the riddle king or whatever his name was, the serial killer, king of riddles, with the exception of him, I don't feel any of the endings feel super satisfying. Even the one with the girl and her brother, Like
Yeah.
that one doesn't feel super satisfying. Like it ends kind of on a nice note, but it never feels like it fully goes full circle.
Yeah.
And that's generally the case with a lot of the side quests. So I would definitely love to see that get improved.
I'd say even the ones that they are side quests, but like even the blacksmith doesn't really get like there's like hints at like her origin and where she comes from and all this stuff, and then like none of it gets resolved. Belle is the same, like she's just there still at the hotel, I guess.
I think that's purposeful. It goes to like them. I'm with you on it that it doesn't really get solved, and but I do think it's purposeful because it is like they're building out this bigger world. Because the blacksmith is from another part of the world. Belle is an agent from outside of Krat, so I do think they are sort of trying to build this bigger world. Where I wouldn't be surprised if you see Belle in a sequel, and if you see the blacksmith in a sequel, which was something that I don't think you normally see going from Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 2
That's
and
fair.
3 most of the time.
And I hope that is the case. I hope we see those characters more, and I hope they are fleshed out more. I kind of like wanted like Belle's supposed to be this badass. You don't see her be a badass at all. Like I was hoping like maybe an opportunity to now summon her instead of a specter or something, and like flesh out these characters a bit. Like you say, it's so not the Souls thing, but this game did dive more into the story than Souls typically does, and so I kind of wish it, like you say, it fleshed those out and those had been a bit more satisfying endings. Exactly what you said, right?
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see in like a brand new release, especially a sequel, what they do with difficulty. Like I think like they heard that this game was too hard. Like that, there was a day one patch to make it a bit easier. They've been patching balance stuff in a lot. And so, I'd be interested to go back now and play New Game Plus. Would I notice a significant difference? I don't know, maybe. But it'd be interesting to see how they deal with that going forward. And it does feel like the sort of franchise that could really turn Souls games on their head and just introduce accessibility features like health sliders for enemies and you, damage sliders for you and enemies. That people have been crying out for in Souls games. Some people have been crying out for in Souls games.
Yeah.
While there's certainly a vocal, maybe minority, maybe not, who certainly don't want that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. Do you think that that's a possibility that we see that in a sequel?
I think so because of the mainline story focus. Like this is ultimately like Souls games are all about like the overall experience. Where this game, I feel like while the overall experience is great, I think the through line is that narrative that I think it becomes easier to sort of look at it and be like a story having an easy mode doesn't take away from the quote unquote experience the developer wants to give you in this game. Because I don't think it does. I think it is the story and the world that they've crafted without that sort of brutal experience of you banging your head against the wall. I think the only moment you might lose out slightly on is the moment with where the blue fairy tells you like, hey, I've been rewinding time this whole time.
Sure.
And unless there's like more nuance to that sort of revelation, which I wouldn't be surprised if there is in sequels, that revelation isn't something that sort of super ties the whole experience together, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they should seize the opportunity to become the accessible Souls game.
Yeah.
Because like, I think there should be conversation around whether or not this is the right Souls game to get new people into Souls games. I don't necessarily feel like it is, unfortunately. The story should make it that.
Yeah.
But I do think it requires a level of perfect parrying and understanding the weapon system, which is relatively complex, at least when you first get into it. The way that leveling up works in conjunction with the weapon system and all those things. There's a lot of interconnected systems, and I'm not sure you can get away with not engaging in those systems, and still be able to make it through the game with as difficult as it is.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm 100% with you on this would be the perfect game to introduce a easier mode for Souls games, even if it is sort of like, hey, here are 2 or 3 amulets you can get in the game and they'll make the game significantly easier for you.
Yeah.
Maybe they reduce the amount of rewards you get or whatever it is. Maybe I don't know. I was gonna say maybe even locking you out of special endings, but I don't think that would be a fun mechanic to introduce with that. I don't think you should punish players for doing something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
But something along the lines of like, hey, here's these, you take up the slots that could be used for like stamina or whatever, and we'll make the game easier for you in those slots. I think that would be a very good compromise that we've seen quite a bit of games outside of Souls games sort of do. So it would be interesting to see a Souls game sort of approach it like that and see how that functions.
Yeah, I just, I'm very much on the bandwagon of Souls games should be accessible. Like, it doesn't affect my experience at all if you want to make yourself invincible. Like, go for it.
Yeah.
Like, if you just want to blast through this boss. If you want to turn off the weight system, I get why it's there. I hate it. I can't be arsed.
I don't think it was that bad.
It
Especially
even, you get to a point where you can have 3 weapons. And I'm like, I can't run around with 2 weapons, man. Like,
you've
I'm
been putting
maxed
too
out.
many, you've been putting too many points in your health and stuff like that.
Well,
Gotta put more in
maybe,
your
but also
endurance.
I'm using heavy weapons for the majority of this game. I'm not running around with little daggers and katanas.
That's on you. That's your
Well,
build choice. That's
maybe.
part of the decision you made as a player.
I guess.
You can't have it all.
I guess. But it wouldn't have impacted if I'd been able to turn off the weight system. I absolutely would have done it, and I would still love this game as much as I love this game. Do you know what I mean? Like, come on.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think the big through line is the story, right? Because the argument that's always made for other Souls games is like the Souls experience is a experience from beginning to end, and if you add a easy mode, you might ruin that experience, right? Or you might adjust how that experience is for the player, which is not what the developer wants, which I think is a fair argument. I don't think that argument necessarily stands super strong for Lies of P, because I don't think that hitting your head against the wall and overcoming the challenge is the point of that. The main point of that is what makes you human, right? And that is through the story. And that's not something you need that challenge to sort of experience, because I don't think perseverance is a big portion of that narrative necessarily.
Yeah. Man, I love this game, and the Game of the Year conversation is going to be tough. I think I've said it a couple of times on the pod. Like, you wake me up on any different day, and I might give you a different answer, and Lies of P is definitely in contention most of those days for my favorite game of this year.
Yeah. I mean, as of right now, for me, I think it is number 1. I don't think until Baldur's Gate, which they said Baldur's Gate is still on track to come in December, which we'll see.
We will see.
This game is absolutely at the top for me. Anything else we need to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. I was ready to wrap it up. Like I say, it is absolutely a must play if you have Game Pass. That is the other reason that I think this could be a first Souls game for a lot of people, right? It's on Game Pass. Great. If you've always been daunted before, now there's no barrier to entry. It's also cheap. Like, if you just had to buy it on PlayStation, like, it's not a full price game, right? I think it's 40. I think it's $40.
Is it?
I might be wrong.
I'm gonna
look it up
for you
me,
right now,
and I'll correct myself before we finish the pod. But yeah, like that is one of the huge benefits, right? Like, you can play this in Game Pass. You've got Game Pass for Halo or for Forza or whatever you've got it for. This is absolutely a new genre that you should probably try, because it's not going anywhere. Like, this is really, I think, one of the best examples of a Souls game not made by From Software. And I'm sure there'll be plenty more to come. Did you get a price on it?
Yes, it is a $60 game.
Oh,
never
mind.
On sale, 40 right now. I mean,
it's
60 is technically not the new normal anymore.
Well,
it is worth it.
True, and it's absolutely worth it. Support the studio if you don't have an Xbox, but if you don't have an Xbox, what are you doing here, silly? This is My Xbox and Me. We do a weekly Xbox podcast, and we're going to start doing a lot more of these deep dives into games that we absolutely love. I believe the next one coming is probably going to be Alan Wake, and I'm going to be gushing over Alan Wake as well, because my God, what a year we've had for video games. Like, Lies of P and Alan Wake both in the same year. My good. And Baldur's Gate, of course.
Baldur's Gate.
If you're still here, thank you so much for still being here. Let us know in the comments below what your favorite parts of Lies of P are, what you hope they do with the DLC, what you hope they do with the sequel. That's actually what I'm most interested to see what you guys think of, because talking about that with Kresh, I hadn't thought about Tin Man and Scarecrow and all those things, and it sounds fucking dope. And I want to play it all right now. And hopefully it won't be too far along. Like you said, like, it looks like they've been thinking about and working on this for a little while, the DLC and the sequel. And so maybe we get some DLC next year. My God. That could
Next
be very
year,
exciting.
at the same time, we get Elden Ring DLC. That would be such a good year for Souls.
Can I be real with you right now, Kresh? When you just said that, I realized I'm more excited for DLC for Lies of P than I am for Elden Ring.
It's because of the story. Until you see like that Elden Ring gameplay and you're like, oh man, I get to be back in that world. There's not really that same level of attachment.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't care what happened to the Erd Tree after I set it on fire.
Yeah.
But I give a shit about what Dorothy's up to and Dorian Gray and dude on the train. Well, I'm never going to remember his name, but that is what it is.
Well, his name in game is like Giano or something like that.
Oh, right. But is that like a fake name then?
Like
and his real name?
I think it's a fake name.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Because like if you go back to him at the end of the game, apparently there's a letter with the initials PP, which is for whatever the person's
the real name is. Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be doing a spoiler cast for the DLC and probably the sequel when those games eventually come out. But my God, is a big video for games. If you're interested in listening to Heroes talk about other games, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, leave reviews on iTunes and stuff like that. We'll read them all out. We always read out reviews. And yeah, let us know if you like this kind of format of stuff, I guess, like deep dives and spoiler casts for games that we've enjoyed, because we could definitely go down the Baldur's Gate route, although probably in 5 years' time when we all finish that game. And we are planning to do it for Alan Wake 2 as well. So let us know if you're excited and interested for that. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I love you, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.